So a couple weeks ago, Henry, a faithful member of our 8 o'clock service, asked me for a sermon on spirits. This gospel reading today offers a perfect time to talk about spiritual beings. And it isn't even All Saints Sunday. Attending graduation for my doctorate meant about a 7-hour drive to Cambridge, Massachusetts. And just thinking about that car ride, finishing the sermon for Sunday, figuring out a place to stay, a place to eat, returning in time for everyone to be in their right places bright and early in the morning, seemed like a multitude of unnecessary hassles. At some point in time during the 5 years that it took me to write the thesis, it stopped being an academic exercise and instead became a fulfillment of a promise that I made to my dad to finish it. After all, he wouldn't be there, so what difference was my presence at this graduation going to make? I remember one particular day writing that thesis so clearly. It was sunny and brilliant outside, the sky was so blue, and I was sitting on the guest room bed, and I was totally exasperated. There was a jumble of research note cards and books and papers scattered all over the room with no viable structure for this paper in sight. And I blurted out, God, if you want this done, you are going to have to help me finish this. You're going to have to come here into this room and figure it all out because I can't do it without your help. And that story is another whole sermon, but I'm convinced that it was only with the power of the Holy Spirit that I was able to finish that. We'll call it a gosh darn sermon or a gosh darn thesis and leave it at that. The topic was incarnational theology and the spiritual care of persons living with dementia. In one part of the paper, I try to describe my own struggle as a long-distance caregiver. I journeyed with both of my parents through dementia, wanting to be with them as much as I could, and I spent an inordinate amount of time driving back and forth on the Northeast Extension, all the way up to way up in upstate New York. I called them almost every night, and each time I would visit my dad or talk with him, he would ask me how I was coming on the thesis. Didn't he understand that driving up to see him was taking a huge chunk out of the time that I did have available to write the thesis? Whatever. I was doing the best I could, and I responded by saying, I'm working on it, and I promise I'll get it done. And he would nod and say, I know you will. Fast forward, and my sister, who shouldered the major part of caregiving, came to the graduation. After the ceremony, she said to me, Nancy, I have something special for you. You'll never believe this. And she handed me a bright orange envelope, and when I turned it over, I recognized that it was my father's writing. It was not his end-stage writing. He died a year earlier. It was the writing that I had known all my life. I'll call it healthy dad writing. I opened up the envelope, and inside the card, he'd written, Nancy, I'm so proud of you. Love, Dad. My sister found the card when she was going through his papers. My fears about whether or not he knew that I'd completed the degree were allayed. My dad's spirit was right there with me. Sometimes it's easy to forget that loved ones who have died are still with us, even though not in the physical sense that they once were. And that very human reality is what this gospel passage speaks to today. The fear that we experience when we lose a loved one, someone who's played an integral role in our lives, but no longer here to hold our hand. Those who have lived through this kind of loss know it is an excruciating experience. We're traumatized and intensely uncertain about the future. We're forced to consider all of these questions like, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for the rest of my life? What happens to me now? How do I continue living? Who can replace this life mentor? Hearing this gospel, it's easy to imagine the disciples asking themselves similar questions. How can we keep the commandments? How can we possibly keep our faith and continue to struggle through life without the day-to-day guiding hand of Jesus? Knowing the challenges and persecution that the young church experienced, we can imagine the significance that Jesus' words of assurance would have had on his disciples. Today, we continue to encounter uncertain and challenging times. And this lesson serves as a reminder that we are not alone. The words spoken by Jesus can be just as reassuring for us now as they were for those disciples. This passage serves as a reminder that Jesus will not abandon us. Even in the midst of an oil crisis, political chaos, social unrest, gun violence, global warming, and just the everyday decision of what to make for dinner, God will not abandon us. So remember him when you eat or drink. African Christian theologians have a great penchant for this passage because it highlights some of their traditional beliefs. They have in Africa and the Caribbean, there is a spiritual ancestor worship. And one of these beliefs is that departed ancestors move on to higher levels of living, of knowledge and wisdom. And because of this, their spiritual beings are always with us to guide us on our way. After death, it's believed that the ancestors return to their descendants in a superior state and with greater power. Today we hear Jesus say, I will ask the Father and he will give you another advocate, someone to be with you forever. The possibilities now seem endless. The limitations of the physical body of Jesus are no longer an impediment. Though the Holy Spirit is here, the Paraclete, which means someone who is called alongside, Jesus walks with us because the Spirit is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Unrestrained by ethnicity or gender or class or sexuality, Spirit guides us to places far beyond the physical and psychic limitations that are imposed by our physical being. Author Rain Muller tells a story about a young widower in Africa who loved his 5-year-old son dearly. He was away on business when bandits came and burned down his whole village. And they took his son away, and when he returned, he saw the ruins of his village, and he panicked. He believed that the charred corpse lying near his home was that of his own child, and he began to beat his chest in deep sorrow. The man organized a cremation ceremony. He collected the ashes and put them in a beautiful velvet pouch. Whether he was working or sleeping or eating, he always carried the bag of ashes with him. One day, his real son escaped from the bandits who'd kidnapped him and found his way home. The boy arrived at his father's new cottage at midnight and knocked on the door. Hearing the knock, the father yelled out, "Who's there?" And his son answered, "Father, it's me. Open the door. This is your son." Now the young father still tearfully carried around the bag of ashes. And in his agitated state, he surmised that this was some mischievous neighbor making fun of him. And he shouted, "Go away!" And he refused to even open the door to see who it might be. Eventually, the boy stopped knocking, left the village, and from that day on, the father and son never saw each other again. Sometime, somewhere, somehow, each one of us accepts something to be the truth. And we hold on to it so tightly that we will never let it go. We cling to it. But if we cling too tightly, when the truth comes in person and knocks at our door, we won't even open it. Had I clung to the idea that since my father was no longer living, what difference would it make to go to the graduation? My sister still would have given me the card, but it wouldn't have had the same impact. My dad's spiritual being was there with me at that ceremony. It's very easy to accept the validity of a death certificate, but sometimes accepting proof of life is almost impossible for us. Sometimes we struggle to see beyond the bad news, to see that life surrounds us, that there really are good things happening and continue to happen every day. Jesus says, because I live, you also live. At first, these words might seem hard to understand. I can't live your life for you. You can't live my life for me. But in these words, Jesus says that his life is the source and cause for our life. Jesus' life is for us, and it's meant to be shared. Just like love, life doesn't really happen until it's given away. And that's what Jesus does. He gives his life for us on a cross. To refuse to acknowledge this difficult truth means carrying around a false representation of life, a bag of ashes, rather than opening our arms to accept and embrace the abundant life that Jesus offers us. As you come forward to give thanks and receive communion today, to begin your week, I invite you to set down those ashes at the foot of the cross and embrace the abundant life that Jesus offers us with both arms wide open. Go ahead, set down those ashes. Because he lives, so do we. Thanks be to God.